Welcome to Tokyo Wave, recorded in a live studio in Harajuku, Japan, with your hosts Aaron and Parker. Alright everyone, welcome to episode 119 of Tokyo Wave. We're your hosts, Aaron Randall
and Parker Allen. On Tokyo Wave, we bring you weekly updates from our studio in Harajuku.
Join us in segments featuring this week's top news,
political happenings,
business,
and other random garbage.
To get us started, here are this week's top news highlights.
North Korea keeps firing missiles, including suspected ICBM.
Stellantis warns owners to stop driving older models after 3 Takata airbag deaths.
Over 1 million chickens being culled as bird flu hits East Japan's Kanto region.
This week in Japan. Alright, so our first story. North Korea keeps firing missiles, including suspected ICBM.
Kyodo News has reported that North Korea continued firing several ballistic missiles on November the 3rd, including a suspected intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM, capable of reaching the continental United States.
The Japanese government initially issued a J alert warning that one of the North Korean missiles was on course to fly over the main island of Honshu, but it later corrected the announcement, saying the projectile had disappeared from radar over the Sea of Japan.
Dun dun dun, dramatic pause. A government source said, however, the J alert had been issued because of a projectile other than the 3 missiles, with some analysts saying it might have been triggered by a section of missile that exploded in midair.
Several foreign affairs experts have said that North Korea's latest missile launches appeared to be in retaliation for the first large-scale joint air exercise by the United States and South Korea in 5 years.
South Korea's military said it will prolong the exercise, which began on Halloween and was initially due to last until November the 4th.
There is growing concern that North Korea may conduct its 7th nuclear test and first since September 2017 in the run-up to the U.S. midterm elections next week.
Well, that's an interesting way to try and disrupt a midterm election.
Yeah. You don't see a lot of other countries firing off missiles during U.S. election time.
Yeah, it's a little bit off the beaten path. Creative approach to electoral intervention, one might say.
For sure.
On November 3rd, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida lambasted North Korea's repeated missile launches as, quote, an outrageous act and totally unacceptable. Tokyo lodged a protest with Pyongyang via the Japanese embassy in Beijing.
In a phone call later in the day, senior diplomats of Japan, South Korea, and the United States criticized the North's actions as imminent threats in the region and severe challenges to the international community.
The U.S. State Department, meanwhile, condemned North Korea's launch of an ICBM as a clear violation of United Nations Security Council resolutions imposing sanctions on the nuclear-armed country.
The Japanese government said the missiles landed outside the nation's exclusive economic zone and no damage had been reported. The initial alert had urged residents in some northeastern and central Japan prefectures to remain indoors.
Does remaining indoors help you if an ICBM hits your house?
Depends if the ICBM has a nuke or not, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. The first missile, an apparent ICBM believed to be a Hwasong-17, seems to have failed after the second stage separated, South Korea's Yonhap news agency reported, citing a defense ministry source.
The launches came a day after North Korea fired about 100 artillery projectiles and more than 20 short-range ballistic and other missiles, one of which fell on the south side of the de facto maritime border for the first time since the Korean peninsula was divided.
Guess they're really pissed off, eh?
Or they just need some money.
Or both.
Yeah.
Why can't it be both?
Usually it's both.
We mentioned in a previous episode that on October 4th, North Korea fired a missile that flew over the Japanese archipelago for the first time since 2017. So these missile launches are getting a little bit more hairy for us here in Japan.
In the wake of the J Alert warning, the second in a month, Shinkansen bullet train services in central Japan were briefly suspended.
Man, I would hate to be on one of those trains.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And as we're talking about this, everyone asks the question, why the hell is North Korea firing missiles? I think the answer is because they can, right? Like, I think the West doesn't want an all-out war in the Korean Peninsula. China doesn't want an all-out war in the Korean Peninsula. So North Korea is in this really interesting spot where they can kind of get away with this, and they can, theoretically keep advancing their ICBMs until they can reach, terminal cities in the US.
Yeah, that's not good, is it?
Not at all.
Up next, Stellantis warns owners to stop driving older models after 3 Takata airbag deaths.
The Associated Press has reported that Stellantis and the U.S. government on November 3rd warned owners of 276,000 older vehicles to stop driving them after Takata airbags apparently exploded and 3 more vehicles, killing the drivers.
The company, Stellantis, formerly known as Fiat Chrysler, is telling people to stop driving Dodge Magnum wagons, Dodge Challenger and Charger muscle cars, and Chrysler 300 sedans from the 2005 through 2010 model years.
Stellantis said it confirmed the drivers' airbag inflators blew apart in 2 cases, killing 2 drivers of 2010 Dodge Chargers. The company said it suspects an inflator rupture in another case that also killed the driver of a unspecified 2010 Dodge. All 3 deaths were in warmer weather U.S. states and happened in the past 7 months, the company said.
The fatalities bring the death toll from exploding Takata airbags to at least 32 worldwide, including 23 in the United States.
Takata used ammonium nitrate to create a small explosion to inflate airbags in a crash, but the chemical can become more volatile over time when exposed to moisture in the air and repeated high temperatures. The explosion can rupture a metal canister and hurl shrapnel into the passenger compartment. Yikes.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely...
terrifying?
Yeah.
Atrocious?
Shrapnel.
Yeah, that's wild.
I mean, nitrate and shrapnel, it's like we're talking about airbags.
Yeah.
Can they like test this stuff?
I'm sure, but they probably, we've had record high temperatures all over the world, and in the U.S. especially, like Florida and California. It's so damn hot in certain places.
Yeah, that doesn't warrant, an airbag like killing somebody with shrapnel though, right?
Yeah, I don't know how that happened, but...
So most of the deaths and about 400 injuries have occurred in U.S. states with warmer weather.
The Stellantis vehicles under the Do Not Drive warning were all recalled in 2015, and free repairs were available since then. Stellantis said it made numerous attempts to reach owners, but the repairs were not made. The recalls affect vehicles in which the airbag inflators have not been replaced as a part of the recall.
In a statement, the U.S. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration said it's aware of other suspected Takata inflator ruptures in vehicles made by other automakers. The agency says it's working with manufacturers to confirm the ruptures, but it would not give further details.
Potential for the dangerous malfunction led to the largest series of auto recalls in U.S. history, with at least 67 million Takata inflators recalled. The US government says the millions have not been repaired. About 100 million inflators have been recalled worldwide. The exploding airbags sent Takata, Japan's foremost manufacturer of airbags, into bankruptcy.
And I can still remember, when this first started, everyone was expecting the CEO of Takata to come out and make an apology or make a statement, and he just literally kept silent.
Oh, wow. It's pretty rare for Japan.
Yeah, and it was not a good posture because it just really made a bad situation even worse.
All right, and up next, over 1 million chickens being culled as bird flu hits East Japan's Kanto region.
The Mainichi has reported that the culling of some 1.04 million chickens at a farm in Ibaraki Prefecture has begun, after the first avian flu cases this season in East Japan's Kanto region around Tokyo have been confirmed.
The Ibaraki prefectural government announced on November 4th that many chickens had died at a poultry farm in the city of Kasumigaura, and that a genetic test confirmed they were infected with the highly pathogenic avian flu.
The prefectural government of Ibaraki received a report from the farm on November 3rd and performed a simple test whose result came back positive the following day. The prefecture has imposed restrictions on 27 poultry farms within a 10-kilometer radius of the affected farm. Ibaraki Prefecture is the largest egg producer in Japan.
We've just been hearing about COVID nonstop. I forgot about the avian flu.
Yeah, it's really sad that these birds who were probably going to die anyway were killed before anybody could get any eggs.
Yeah.
It was just last week or 2 weeks ago that Ibaraki turned up to be like the second worst ranked prefecture in Japan, judged by its popularity.
Really?
And the governor protested, saying, basically, this contest is bullshit.
Interesting. But Ibaraki isn't a place that I hear people go to and travel to.
Yeah, it's not without its destinations. There's actually a really beautiful flower park that's close to the ocean, and there's also some water sports that can be enjoyed in rivers around the region. But Ibaraki just doesn't have a very good image as, sort of a less attractive region of Japan, and I think that led to the result in the contest. Adding to that, also, I believe seismically speaking, Ibaraki Prefecture is the most susceptible to large earthquakes.
Oh yeah, I mean, gosh, all the time when you're looking at where the origin of the earthquake was, it's in Ibaraki all the time,
Yeah, and it's really kind of sad and ironic because, they developed Tsukuba City as sort of the emergency capital city in case something terrible happened in Tokyo, and they needed to relocate the seat of government to Tsukuba.
Oh, I didn't know that. Interesting.
Fun fact.
I thought it was just all science and research out there.
No, they made a emergency capital too, apparently.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
In the most earthquake susceptible prefecture in Japan.
Yikes.
Maybe not the best idea, guys.
All right, and up next on Yene and Abilia, we're going to be talking about how Square Enix sale of Western studios were the culmination of a train wreck in slow motion.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Tokyo Wave.
Yene and Abilia, y'all.
So, video game industry online media outlet GamesIndustry.biz recently had an exclusive interview with Eidos Montreal founder Stéphane de Astus who reflected on the issues that he believes led to the studio's sale.
On May 2nd, 2022, Stefan Diasus began receiving emails and phone calls from former employees. The shared tone was a request for advice and perspective. What's happening? Is it a good sign, or should we be worried?
These messages, of course, referred to the shock news that Japan-based Square Enix had sold Crystal Dynamics, Eidos Montreal, and Square Enix Montreal, plus all of the intellectual property the trio of studios collectively held, to Embracer Group for a bewilderingly low $300 million.
Even though Diastos was surprised by the price tag, the Eidos Montreal founder wasn't terribly surprised at how the studio's relationship with Square Enix turned out, saying the roots of its demise were evident even before he left the company in 2013.
Diastos told GamesIndustry.biz, "It was a trajectory that could be predicted. I left because things were missing at the head office. Pre-Square Enix Eidos has a great tradition of development teams, but they don't have superior knowledge of how to sell their games, and that was quite clear."
He added, "You could look at all the great games that Eidos did, and apart from Tomb Raider back then, that was a whole different era, the Hitmans and all those could have been 6, 7, 8 million unit projects. Deus Ex could have been that also. We hit good numbers, don't get me wrong, but I always felt that the way to sell games that Eidos used were so traditional and conventional that it wasn't innovative, and it was always underselling the quality of the games."
Eidos Montreal was founded 2 years before Square Enix acquired the UK-based publisher, and at the time was only the fourth major studio in Montreal, alongside Behavior Interactive and teams from Ubisoft and Electronic Arts.
The studio was structured to have 3 production pipelines, kicking off with revivals of the Deus Ex and Thief series, while helping Crystal Dynamics reboot Tomb Raider by handling the multiplayer component as its third project.
Diastos explained, "It was clear that the main purpose of Eidos Montreal was to increase capacity of production or development capacity within the group, because Crystal Dynamics was branded like a mono-project studio, as was IO Interactive. Montreal was there to save the back catalog. It was clear that we had great intellectual property that were sleeping on the shelf. Legacy of Kain that was discussed, but it wasn't as strong as Deus Ex and Thief."
2011's Deus Ex Human Revolution, the studio's first release, garnered critical acclaim and put Eidos Montreal on the map. I remember seeing previews for this game and being like, wow. The 2014 return of Thief was less well received, although Diastos says the game remains one of my favorite projects and maintains that an extra 9 months could have produced a much better product.
Diastos said, "We did our best and we struggled, and that's life in development in games. You don't hit it off all the time. And we were close, but just missing some finishing touches. You know, and Aaron, you know a lot about this, yourself, video game consultant. I mean, this is basically preaching to the choir for you, right?"
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the stuff he's saying, like, had we had another extra 9 months, I mean, every studio wants an extra 9 months or a year to finish the game, right?
Diastos continued, "The Deus Ex development team was one of the strongest that I've assembled, and they were really united. They knew the challenges. With Thief, I didn't have that luxury to have a core group of people that had worked together previously, so I went to recruit strong people, very strong people, but they didn't have the opportunity to work together on previous games. And that maybe could have been one of the reasons why it wasn't as smooth as Deus Ex. It was a train wreck in slow motion, to my eyes anyway. it was predictable that the train was not going in a good direction.
Square Enix has become notorious for declaring multi-million selling games to be disappointments. And Diastus reports the extended behind the scenes as well. He recalls a meeting regarding the company's financial performance for 2012, where the Eidos group of studios was expected to generate $65 million in profit. Instead, he was told the developers had lost $65 million that year.
Diastus said, "We were dumbfounded, especially because my studio didn't have any deliverables for that year."
You know, just a quick comment in here. This is another really interesting thing and something that's going to have to be adjusted because games take really long to make, right? And like if you're, especially these like AAA conglomerate studios, and the way Square Enix kind of constructed this partnership between all these studios, it's kind of like doomed to fail unless you're releasing games every year. You know, like the point about not having a deliverable that year is really says something about the industry in itself, because most good studios, you're not going to have a deliverable every year.
I mean, think about it. Like GTA 6, we've been waiting for that since like the PlayStation 3 came out.
Right. And this just popped into my head, but gamers will say this. What's happened is games have gotten really shitty because studios, in order to meet certain quotas, you know, year on year, they'll put out a game that's not finished, and then they'll put out DLC, right? Extra content for the game. And they'll release that every 6 months. So you buy the game for what you would normally pay, like whatever a game would cost, you know, 5-10 years ago, $80. And then you have to spend another $50 every year or every 6 months to get more content for the game. So you're kind of, it's almost like a Kickstarter campaign. It's like, hey, we've got this really cool game idea. It's not finished, but if you buy it now and keep investing in us over the next 3 years, the game will be complete. They've had to move to this model because, you know, games take a long time to make. So I guess, you know, a lot of studios have been, okay, let's cut it up, right? But gamers hate that. I mean,
sounds like an NFT.
It's terrible.
So Diastus said he began receiving messages from the team worrying about the fate of the studio and repeatedly called on management in London to discuss a solution, but only to receive silence.
Diastus said, "I was losing hope that Square Enix Japan would bring great things to Eidos. I was losing confidence in my headquarters in London. In their annual fiscal reports, Japan always added 1 or 2 phrases saying, 'We were disappointed with certain games. They didn't reach expectations.' And they did that strictly for certain games that were done outside of Japan." Sounds like a terrible management technique.
Yeah, it's like a passive aggressive, we kick ass, but you guys suck kind of language.
I've got kind of a smile on my face because this just sounds like, I hate to say it, but such a Japan Inc. thing to do. You know, when working with a foreign partner or something. Yikes.
It's like, we don't have Final fucking Fantasy, assholes. And they just remake it and remake it and remake it, and people keep buying it and buying it and buying it. I mean, not to, you know, rip on Final Fantasy. It's a fantastic game, but I mean, they just keep on milking that cow, and milk just keeps coming out.
Yeah, specifically Final Fantasy VII.
Unlike those eggs from Ibaraki, they are gone. So while Deus Ex Human Revolution was a superb debut for Eidos Montreal, subsequent projects struggled to match or surpass its success. Diastus left Eidos Montreal in summer of 2013. Crystal Dynamics studio head Daryl Gallagher left at the end of 2015. In 2017, IO Interactive successfully negotiated a management buyout, including the intellectual property for the popular Hitman series, after Square Enix began looking for a buyer to take the studio off its hands.
Even the group's biggest success, the rebooted Tomb Raider trilogy, was in decline, with 2018's Shadow of the Tomb Raider receiving lower review scores than its 2 forebears. And then 2020's long-awaited Marvel's Avengers was poorly received.
DS2 said regarding this, "It's a train that is slowing down and needs some injection of energy or money or something, but the train is slowing down. And it's unfortunate because there are a lot of good people in those studios."
For sure. I can attest to the Marvel's Avenger game was, wow, such a disappointment. But I think it's time for Marvel and DC stuff to die and go away. I'm so sick of everything being Superman, Superwoman, everything, you know.
I absolutely agree with you. I have never liked superhero games. I always thought it was just like a money grab. And I mean, has there ever been a good superhero game?
I don't know, maybe someone listening is like, you guys don't know about blah, blah, blah. But I mean, like the movie industry, right, has been taken over by superheroes. And I'm glad it hasn't gone over to video games. There actually is Arkham Knight's Batman game, which is very, very good. I have to shout out to that one. But otherwise, you know, let's keep the Avengers. Let's keep the whole thing that, you know, basically tainted Hollywood out of the gaming industry. Not a bad idea.
Yeah, Hollywood, make movies. Game industry, make games. Can we make a deal? So obviously, DS Deuce has been keeping a close eye on Square Enix and his former studio, which he founded. He was intrigued when sister studio Crystal Dynamics signed a multi-project deal with Marvel, which eventually led to the beleaguered Marvel's Avengers and last year's Guardians of the Galaxy, which, despite being well reviewed by critics, quote, undershot initial expectations, according to the publisher.
DeSuze also said, maybe at the time the deal was signed, the superhero thing was a big thing. It still is. But there is some fatigue with superheroes, as me and you just said, Parker. And especially in games, very few manage to be successful with superheroes. There's always the Batman from the guys at Rocksteady. There was a Spider-Man, but out of the people that have done it, the success rate of superhero games is not good.
Again, Hollywood, make movies. Game industry, make games.
But what if we want to make a game based on a movie?
Fuck you!
Actually, to anyone who's a gamer or like knows about the game industry, like there are so few games based off of movies that are good. They're all train wrecks, man. They're all so bad.
And you know, it's really been a trend since the beginning of video games. It always just feels like a cash grab. Like whenever I see it or I see someone playing it, I'm like, these people got taken for a ride, you know? It's like their fandom of the movie is almost being treated like, you gotta play the game because you like the franchise, right, bro? And it's almost like it gives the developers sort of this license to underdeliver with the expectation that, you know, people will play the games anyway because they love the superheroes.
Right.
Which I guess for a time was true because they made lots of games about superheroes, but seems like that ain't happening anymore. So maybe they need to learn to play a new instrument that is not called superhero.
The most successful games that come from movies are not based directly on the movie, but they exist within the universe of the movie. And the best examples are Star Wars games, the Star Wars Battlefront games, old school Star Wars games for Super Nintendo, for like the computer back in the 90s. There was this TIE Fighter game, for example, that was really cool. But none of those were like based on the movie directly. It just existed in the universe, right? So Star Wars has done a really good job of doing that, or did a really good job of that, 10, 20 years ago.
Well, and another exception is like GoldenEye on N64. People still play that. What an awesome game.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if the 007 franchise produced any decent games after that, but GoldenEye was so good, I'll forgive all the rest of them. That game was awesome.
It was so good. And I think it's already on Switch, or it's coming to Switch online. So if you have a Switch, you can play online against people. That's one game that I must say I was very good at as a kid, and nobody.
Oh yeah, GoldenEye. I
Yeah.
think everybody thinks they were the best at GoldenEye.
Yeah, and
Boom, headshot. Boom, headshot.
yeah, very cool game. Can't wait for its release on the Switch. It might be out. Maybe I need to check.
Diastus also said, quote, "If I read between the lines, Square Enix Japan was not as committed as we hoped initially. And there are rumors, obviously, that with all of these activities of mergers and acquisitions, that Sony would really like to have Square Enix within their wheelhouse. I heard rumors that Sony said they're really interested in Square Enix Tokyo, but not the rest. So I think Square Enix CEO Yosuke Matsuda put it like a garage sale."
So Diasu suggests that may explain the $300 million price tag for 3 AAA studios and a host of long-running IP. Man, if I was up there, I definitely would have liked to have bought that, including the blockbuster Tomb Raider franchise. By comparison, Embracer purchased Gearbox in a deal worth $1.3 billion.
Wow. Yeah, that kind of puts things into perspective, right?
I bet they turn around and sell it for like 30 billion. Nah, that's too much. But, turn around and sell it for a lot more than they paid.
Yeah, it's one of those things, right? I mean, the games industry is an industry. So obviously, people are fans of games. People like to play games. And I think the sort of business activity within the games industry really sort of angers the fans because they see all of these deals happening and they worry about what's going to happen to the future of the games that they like.
Very true. Yeah.
And oftentimes their worries are confirmed because, it's unfortunate, but, with the race to make more profit, it often becomes a race to the bottom for quality. And gamers like quality games that require time and money that M&A focused, business people don't give a rat's ass about.
Exactly. And, this is not the only case that we've seen of AAA studios screwing up. This year has been like the year of screw ups for so many games. Like if I narrow in on Blizzard, who, did Warcraft, StarCraft, and most recently Overwatch. Blizzard, first of all, Blizzard's been in a bunch of scandals, and I guess a lot of the guys who worked there were just complete assholes. A lot of the upper management guys just did terrible things. A woman committed suicide because of the stuff that the guys were telling her inside the company. So basically what's happened is they got rid of entire departments that were in charge of games, but they still released those games after they fired everyone and no one was working on them, but they still released them. Warcraft 3 was an example, Reforged. They released that, but there was nobody in the studio to actually work on maintaining the game. So they released an unfinished product that was supposed to be, as I said earlier, they release stuff now and then they update it every 6 months. So it was released with the intention of being updated. They never updated it. And if you owned the old Warcraft, if you install this on your computer, it erases your old Warcraft. So you're stuck with this shitty thing that's not finished. Overwatch 2 that just came out, people couldn't connect to the server to play online. It's an online first-person shooter game. Actually, Overwatch 1 was an awesome game. Great music, great characters, incredible. Shows just how good of a company Blizzard is. But with the second installment, they made so many fuck-ups that a AAA studio shouldn't be making, and it just pissed everyone off. Everyone at this point is done. People are done with Blizzard. It sucks because Blizzard made like my favorite game, which is StarCraft. But I mean, those days are over.
It's kind of sad, I mean, I myself grew up a gamer, not doing much gaming these days, but, it's like back in the day in a simpler time, people had the time and the money. And I think there was also this sense of commitment that, we're making something new, we're creating this new industry. And I always tend to get nostalgic about these sort of things because, maybe I've got a slanted opinion about this because, I haven't really played games in the last decade, to be honest with you. But it just seems like, I see the stuff that's coming out and nothing just makes me want to run to the store to buy a PS5,
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, another big one that I have to mention if we're talking about AAA screw-ups is Cyberpunk 2077, which I bought a PS4 for. The guys who made this are a company called CD Projekt Red, and they made a game called The Witcher, or a series, The Witcher 3 being the most popular. An incredible 3D action adventure game with just about every kind of system you can imagine in the game. The immersion level is just off the charts. So they're like, okay, we're going to make a futuristic version of The Witcher, and it's going to be Cyberpunk 2077. And like just all the stuff they promised, they didn't deliver on. They delivered an unfinished product. Like things in the game, like objects in the game, you could see them loading one by one. If you walk into a room, like imagine GTA, you walk into like a room that's a kitchen, there's like a sink and there's cups and everything. It's like things are not cached and loaded. You walk in somewhere and it's all, and it's like a demo. It's a demo that the developers like were using, and it was completely unfinished.
Wow.
When day and nighttime changed, like the screen would go completely black and then all the textures would re-render again, right? Driving didn't work. None of the AI worked. Like AI is like the NPCs walking around. Like some of them were just like didn't have legs and were just like doing weird stuff. So that's how they released it. And then Sony PlayStation took it off the PS4 store because they've like never done this before for a AAA game. They're like, because people couldn't play it. It was crashing and destroying people's PlayStation 4s. So,
whoa.
Yeah. There's a serious issue right now with big games. And I think it goes both ways. Customers' expectations of games is way too high. This is why we can't remake a lot of older games quickly, because everything has to be open worlds and there has to be like tens of thousands of interactions with NPCs and a quest system and just all these things that take so much time and so much money, right? It's just, it becomes an impossibility. And then the developers who have to meet these high expectations from consumers, never have enough time to finish anything. And the marketing guys at the companies have no idea how any of this works anyways. So they're like, yeah, let's just release it unfinished, and then we'll update it later, right? That's how it works. So it's just the ecosystem is kind of screwed up right now.
Yeah, it seems just like a really toxic environment.
Oh yeah, and it's a terrible environment to work in as a developer too. There's this thing called crunch, where crunch is like whenever they have to get the game out, so the last like 2 months before like a game release, people are working like 24 hours. They're sleeping in the offices. It's like Dentsu level work culture.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think didn't we talk once about the Gran Turismo story and how people were like sleeping under their desks and working on this game in their off hours because the studio didn't think it would make any money, and ended up being the most massive racing game franchise of all time.
I'm not surprised, but yeah, that happens all the time.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate the direction the games industry has taken, and there's really no end in sight. It just seems like this constant sort of, high expectations, low delivery, problem after problem. I mean, it's eventually going to start affecting console sales. I mean,
oh, for sure. You know what, though? I think the silver lining is indie games, because what's going on is the best stuff, or the most innovative and cool stuff, is coming out from indie developers. This can be anywhere from one person to a team of 10 or 20 people, but they're all working in their highly specialized fields. and highly optimized small teams, right? And the Nintendo Switch is taking a lot of these games on too. So like the Switch, usually Steam on PC, and then Switch are the big platforms to release these indie games on. So Switch is really positioned in a really good place right now, I think. And Nintendo always finds a way to grow, and I think then them taking on a lot of indie games recently has really helped out a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting that, Nintendo, which I think for a time, back in the GameCube days, is like, Nintendo is sort of like for kids. But then, with their mobile gaming prowess, obviously this started with the Game Boy. They've always been the pioneers in mobile games. I remember I bought a PSP and I was like so stoked because, it had all these good graphics and had this, really cool interface. And I left it in my car one day. And of course, it was America, so it got stolen. I never bought another one because I was so pissed off.
Yeah.
But thankfully, I don't know, Game Boys don't get stolen as much in America, I guess.
Yeah. And I think the Switch isn't perfect. It's quite old hardware. And like a lot of developers too, they have to optimize their game to the max so it can run on the Switch. But it's just the portability and everything has really made it a great platform for AAA and indie games alike.
Yeah, and it just it really makes me think that simple is best.
Absolutely.
Go back to basics. Do it with small teams. You don't need everything to be AAA. Yeah, and going back to the whole deal with Square Enix and Eidos, it really just reminds me of this difficulty of Japanese multinationals to manage and acquire foreign subsidiaries. You just keep on hearing the same story over and over again. Ex-Japanese company want to go global, so they buy all this global stuff, and it just doesn't work out that well.
Right.
But I want to say, that's not to, say that Japanese companies can't do well global. Look at the automakers. Toyota, Nissan, they're staples across the world. Mm-hmm. And, Suzuki's got this huge market share in India. And of course, India's growing economy. They're going gangbusters in India.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, it just seems like especially more tech or services based companies that try to expand outside the home market of Japan don't seem to be able to replicate that success like manufacturers.
No, for sure. And going back to Square Enix and talking about another giant, like Sony is able to do it, right? Sony's able to partner and be successful in their partnerships. Back to the days of Squaresoft, and with the Final Fantasy games, I think they thought that they were going to be really big. They were really big, and then they made that movie and a lot of other stuff because they had the money back then in the 90s and everything. And then they became Square Enix. I think they've had this kind of initiative to expand globally. And what we talked about today was part of that initiative, but them kind of selling out and going back to Japan. And what I think they're going to do is they're going to double down on the IP they have that's working, which is the Final Fantasy series and a few other really popular series, but especially the Final Fantasy VII games. They're making like 4 or 5 games just out of that universe. And that's what's going to make them a lot of money in Japan and abroad.
Yeah, and it's hard to knock it because, if you've got a game franchise that's making you a boatload of money, why would you want to invest in these other franchises that aren't making you a boatload of money?
Exactly.
So, while it might seem unfair from the US or Canadian or European developers' perspective, if you look at the dollars and cents, it does kind of add up, even though it is very unfortunate.
Talking about making things simple, Pokemon was such a success, right? And now, Pokemon is kind of all managed and published under the name of the Pokemon Company. So that's a great example of they got one thing that works, and that's what they're focused on.
Yeah, Pokemon. Gotta catch them all. And there's a shitload of them.
Yeah, now there are.
Yeah, after they went past 151, I was just like, you know what? There's just too many. I can't catch them all anymore. I gave up, man.
Hey, listeners, that's right. You listener right there.
Who do you think should be our next guest on Tokyo Wave? Let us know. Drop us a line at wave@tokyowave.jp.
We hope you enjoyed Tokyo Wave.
If you haven't already, you can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube.
Join us again next week on Tokyo Wave.